Eilvig raced down the forest path, his heart pounding and his head ablaze with fear. He'd been running his mount hard, and the horse's body was frothing with sweat. It had been a few hours since he had left the glade, and not a moment had went by that he wasn't replaying the image of Adelbert burning in his mind. On his way to the glade, he had felt like the forest had been hindering him. Paths that had been there all of his life suddenly went different directions, and some areas seemed not at all like he knew them to be. But now, the opposite seemed to be happening. His horse seemed to know exactly where to go, and parts of the path that were usually narrow and difficult seemed to have opened up wide just for him. He was making good time, and thought he would be arriving home soon. Aelvig's mind was racing with possibilities and unknowns. Who would be trying to burn Adelbert? Was it an invasion by a rival elf lord? A precursor to a new war? Was it roving bandits seeking death and plunder? Would any be alive by the time he made it home? But he knew he would have no answers until he got there. As he traveled, he finally came across a lightly running stream and knew home was close. He decided it was time to stop and prepare. He still had both his horses with him and brought both to drink from the stream. The horse he had been riding was exhausted and close to collapse. He would be terrible in a fight just now. But that was to be expected, and why he had dumped most of his pack and gear at the glade and let the second horse run alongside him unencumbered. She was tired as well, but still had fight left in her. Aelvig switched his saddle over to the fresher horse and double-checked the straps. He went through his pre-battle checks that he had learned as an outrider. Stirrups and bridle secure, composite bow strung and ready, quiver of arrows on the horse's flank, ready to be drawn in an instant. He then dipped his head in the stream and drank deeply before filling his water skin. Adelbert was now maybe 10 minutes away, at the edge of the forest. He pondered his approach. It would be slower to take the forest path, but it would let him scout the area and give him the element of surprise. Or he could leave the forest now and take the open road. This would be faster and give him more open room where his horse archery would be best used, but any attackers would see him coming from a long distance off. He decided it didn't matter, and he had to take that route anyways, knowing every second meant more of his home would be reduced to ash. Once he made it to the edge of the forest and met the open road, he saw the smoke rising from the direction of Adelbert. He raced towards it at full gallop, face contorted in rage. As he got closer, he saw with horror that most of the town was currently ablaze, with the houses on the outer perimeter already collapsed and smoldering. He then saw an explosion of light near the center of town and heard a booming voice cutting through the chaos, saying, "Rush unto oblivion!" Aelvig led his horse into town, staying clear of the fires that raged all around him. As he caught sight of the longhouse, he saw a small fire had recently caught on the roof there. All of its windows had been boarded up, and a line of stakes had been planted in the ground about 10 feet in front of the door. And there stood Mattathios and two great beasts locked in mortal combat. The elf was covered in blood everywhere but on his mask, which was now ablaze with light and made it hard to look directly at him. He had a bloodied sword in one hand, and his left hand was on his stomach, seemingly covering a wound. He was surrounded by a thick purple mist that clung to the ground and was suffused with beams of golden light. Around the area lay Aelvig's dead kinsman, but now was not the time to mourn. He looked at the two beasts who circled the elf. He looked as the two beasts circled the elf, staying just outside the circle of light and mist. Both beasts were covered in a thick black fur and were heavily muscled. Their thick brow ridges came only to about the shoulders of Mattathios, but both were hunched and standing on all four legs, despite looking humanoid. Their front limbs were massive and very long, enabling the slanted posture that they had. They both moved in perfect synchronicity with each other as they circled Mattathios, looking for any opportunity to land a crushing blow. Aelvig did not hesitate, and he loosed an arrow, intending to hit the nearest beast in the back, hoping to hit a lung. As he did this, the further beast saw him, and as soon as he noticed, both beasts threw themselves to the side, causing his arrow to miss wide. Eilvig would have been scared or even impressed, but all he felt was rage as his home burned around him. As he turned his horse, he got off one more arrow, this time catching a beast in its left thigh as it tried to recover. The beast howled and stumbled, but his companion charged. Eilvig prodded his horse to a gallop uh, in the opposite direction, and he got off one more arrow, catching the wounded beast in its left flank. He had not practiced his horse archery in some time, but it seemed his body could not forget the movements the elf lords had drilled into him. He led his horse out of the village and into the open farmland. He fired off a few more arrows haphazardly, just to ensure the beast kept chasing him. But once the beast got to the edge of the village, however, it stopped, dead in its tracks. A howl of pain cut through the sounds of the town ablaze, and the beast in front of him clutched its chest and shuddered. Then it turned and ran back towards the center of town and Mattathios. Eilvig turned his house around and charged back after it. He found Mattathios alone in front of the longhouse, standing over the lifeless corpse of one of the beasts, his sword protruding from its chest. Eilvig felt a moment of relief, seeing the beast dead, but then, out of nowhere, his whole world went silent. He could no longer hear his home on fire. He could not even hear himself breathing. And then, all at once, the ground came rushing up to meet him. As he regained consciousness, Eilvig saw the world in a blurred double vision, and he was lost in a confused silence. He saw the beast standing over his fallen horse, ripping its head off with massive and powerful hands. Eilvig scrambled to his feet and drew his sword. As he held the blade before him, he saw that it had been broken in half, probably in his fall. Then he felt something touch his shoulder, so he whirled and threw his sword at it. Mattathios caught his arm, and his mask was now ablaze with a dark purple and golden light. It pulsated now with a quick, pure white. With this, Eilvig felt a surge of hope, and his hearing was restored. Mattathios put a finger to his lips, pointed to the dagger Eilvig carried, and then made a half-circle motion before pointing to the beast. Eilvig was a hunter and understood the plan. Flank the enemy and wait for the time to strike. He threw his broken sword to the ground and drew his dagger while moving off slowly to the left. As he did, he saw the beast rip out and consume the liver of his horse. As he made his way around, he saw Mattathios stomp the ground with his foot, and the same thick, dark mist mingled with golden light swirled out to cover the ground around him again. The elf then bent down and held his palm to the earth for a second. As he lifted his hand and rose, Eilvig saw a shimmering geometric symbol made of golden light, pulsing and swirling upright in the spot where the elf's hand had been. Mattathios' mask then flared with golden light, and he bellowed, "Is this all the fury you could muster, wretch?" The beast then rounded on the elf, stood up on its hind legs, and threw its arms up in the air, and let loose a terrible roar. As it did, its body seemed to emanate a dark purple energy, and the beast grew in size noticeably. The beast's roar pierced Eilvig to the core, and he had to drop to cover behind the cart. It was all he could do to not run in fear. But after a moment, the feeling passed, and he rose again, determined to get around behind the beast. It charged Mattathios, running swiftly on all fours, with its terrifying slanted gait. Just as it neared the fog covering the ground around Mattathios, the glyph of light shot out a dazzling beam of gold and hit the beast square in the chest. The beast stumbled and roared in pain, but then resumed its attack. Once it entered the swirling ground fog around Mattathios, the beast slowed, the fog seemingly sucking at his feet like a thick mud. Eilvig saw this as his opportunity, for the beast would most likely try to escape soon. As he charged the beast from behind, he saw another blast of golden light hit its shoulder, and the beast stumbled again. Eilvig yelled as he drove his dagger into the beast's thick, muscled back. It roared in pain and turned swiftly, delivering a devastating backhand to Eilvig with its massive forearm. Aelvig lay on the floor, grasping for breath, feeling like his lungs had just exploded. He coughed and hacked and slowly regained his breathing. But each breath brought a piercing pain on the right side of his body. He tried to sit up, but the pain caused his vision to blur, and he fought to maintain consciousness. As he heard the beast roar again, it was a terrifying death rattle that made Aelvig freeze in terror. Then there was nothing. All he could hear was the fires and the crumbling buildings of his beloved village around him. It could have been seconds or hours, but after a time he heard some footsteps approaching him. Then he saw Matithos kneel down beside him. The elf placed a hand on the right side of Aelvig's body, and a golden light pulsated out of it. As it did, Aelvig felt his pain subside, and his breathing returned to normal. His body was still in torment, but he was able to sit up. Matithos rose and offered a hand to help Aelvig up as well. The elf placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "A few survivors remain. Where may we seek refuge?"